Okay, our next session that we're on to is water treatment, looking at closed system water treatment. So we have today to talk about this, we have Pete Horne, consulting engineer at FairHeat, Ellie Hiscock, a graduate engineer at FairHeat, and John Pepps, who's M&E service manager from Telford Homes. So if the three of you could unmute and put your videos on, that'd be great. Great.
Okay, hi guys, I'm Pete. Today going to be chatting a little bit about water treatment, particularly in line with, what's happened here? Are you clicking through it?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, going to take you through water treatment over the next sort of 20 minutes or so, particularly highlighting why water treatment is so important and what goes wrong. What FairHeat's involvement is to ensure that that water treatment is upheld and that water quality is maintained throughout your system. Going to hand over quickly to John to talk about the contractor engagement and the importance of that, particularly in the pre-commissioning process, and a little case study on where that's gone particularly well. Then Ellie's going to take you through some legacy sites, what we do to maintain water quality through there. And then I'm going to take a little discussion on how we can improve water quality monitoring in line with my graduate project, which was conducted in 2019 and 2020. Do I need to? Oh, there we go. So first one is why is water treatment so important? And the sort of overarching factor is that it is a protection of the investment, the significant investment that has been incorporated into a district heating scheme. Obviously, we want to minimize corrosion through chemically induced and microbiologically induced factors, and minimize these as much as possible. The sort of down the line, the sort of increased factors that we see due to poor water quality significantly raises the maintenance costs throughout a project lifetime. So forced HIU servicing, which is often met with residents' discomfort, and a lot of residents refusing access as well, which Thomas just briefly mentioned, and block strainers throughout your network. I have seen in the last couple of months actually a plant room with primary valve sticking, which dramatically reduced the plant room efficiency of your boilers due to high return temperatures. It's just not controlling very well. And then knock-on effect to that was increased tariffs, resident discomfort, poor resident satisfaction, and yeah. Okay, so yeah, here's an example of what happens if we don't have a pre-commissioning process in place. This was a site that we visited. We did find out almost immediately that the system was filled and then left stagnant for 4 months. Periodic testing had not been taken throughout the ongoing process, and there were significant remedial actions required, which incurred very high cost. Reflushing, biocide dosing, lots of attention to maintain circulation, strainer cleaning, all primarily because there was a breakdown in the process from the outset. And that's what I would want to really highlight throughout this sort of first section, is that the process needs to be implemented, and it needs to be ensured to get the best water quality we can get before anything does go wrong. So that's primarily what FairHeat are sort of targeting to do. We go through a sort of set process from the word go, which is reviewing of method statements. We take an iterative approach to this. So ideally sort of like 1 or 2 back and forths with the water treatment specialist to make sure that we get all of the guidance and requirements included within that method statement, so that we can then use the method statement as effectively a Bible through the rollout of the process. So we're looking to ensure that flushing velocities and dosing and various on-site documentation are conducted and completed throughout the flushing process. We do go on site to witness that, and also witness sampling in line with British standards is what we're looking for. And within that method statement, we are looking to get the results of those samples in line with the target acceptable limits that have been defined in the method statement. Throughout ongoing sampling, we're looking for trend analysis. That's to maintain a proactive approach over a reactive approach. And we really want to make sure that any issues that do come from the samples are sort of dealt with before they become a major issue. On the sort of back end of this process, we do review flushing documentation and certification, and yeah, go through, just make sure that all of that paperwork that was conducted throughout is present and complete. And we also take particular note with bacterial samples, as we know that a number of these, particularly microbiological sample results, may not be complete. So again, just want to reiterate the importance of that method statement. We want a clear identification of the process adopted. We're starting to see a lot of uptake in the closed system filtration flushing over a flush to drain methodology. I personally do prefer that filtration flushing process. I think it's got a lot of benefits that do actually help the water quality in the first place. We want clarity on all acceptable limits, whether that be through fill water quality, measurements to confirm removal of cleaning chemicals, your 7-day validation sample with particular interest to inhibitor levels. So we want minimum and maximum inhibitor levels throughout. That's to make sure that overdosing doesn't become a problem. We're very aware that underdosing is a problem, but overdosing also can have significant risk on your system. Just on the right hand side, you've got 2 outtakes, one from BG29 and one from CP1 2020. There's a bit of a sort of misalignment in the chloride levels here, and chloride can increase the risk of corrosion, and we want to maintain and limit that as much as possible. Chloride can only really get into your system through your fill water line, and particularly in London, chloride levels are between 60 and 80 milligrams per litre. So that CP1 2020 at the bottom of less than 100, we would always opt to go for that over a 250 milligram per litre as stated in BG29. Again, we just want a clear process outlined in our method statement, and another key point just at the bottom there is a clear description of where the water treatment specialist scope ends. So that has to be determined between the M&E contractor and the water treatment specialist. but we want clarity from the word go so that we can maintain accountability throughout the water treatment process. Just going to hand over to John now. He's going to take you through some contractor engagement.
Great. Thank you, Peter. I know water treatment's probably not the most glamorous part of a service installation, but it's actually a vital part of making the system work. If the system's all just sitting there, nice empty pipe work, we're not going to get any heat. So the water in the network is really the lifeblood of the system. So we want to keep that as healthy as possible. Communication is the key very early in the project, although the water treatment doesn't really come into effect once the system is filled and commissioning starts. To get the requirements spelled out at the very start when the consultants are putting together their specifications and briefs, so that the M&E installing contractors know exactly what is expected and required of them, is vital. Quite often we might see consultants just stick a one line in saying that systems will be flushed and treated. They might make a reference to BG29, but we look for a little bit more detail on that, a little bit more clarity to the installing contractors so they know exactly what's actually required. So if we get a decent brief to start with, then we look to the contractors coming up with detailed method statements of how they're going to carry out their flushing processes and ongoing water treatment. And we study those method statements in detail. FairHeat give us assistance on those, looking at the detail, commenting if anything needs to be tweaked. And basically the key there is getting the systems right to start with. If it goes off in the right foot, we've got to be flushed correctly, and the water treatment regime is initiated at the right time as soon as systems are filled. It's a lot easier to keep them within limits rather than having a problem and trying to dose, shock treat, or reflush in the worst case. The other thing, we get the test results come back, we get a nice certificate with a load of numbers on it, plus and minus figures, and it's not always the easiest of things to read. Most of us on this call, I'm sure there may be a few water treatment specialists out there, most of us won't necessarily know the numbers off the top of the head as to what is required. So getting the test certificates with almost like an executive summary, a dummy's guide to what's happening is a useful thing. And also tracking those results as well. We look for water treatment tests to be carried out fortnightly as soon as systems are filled and circulating, and basically monitor those results fortnightly. And if it can be demonstrated in a graphical form, you can see straight away how trends are going. I think we'll have a slide in a minute which goes an example of that. If everything settles down and it's all within limits for a couple of months at fortnightly intervals, then we may stretch that out to monthly intervals. But again, on each one of those months, if things start to head into out of kilter, moving out of acceptable limits, then we would look to try and make remedial works, dosing accordingly to bring them back into line before it goes out of spec. So again, to categorise again, if we can get it right to start with, it saves a lot of hassles later on. The water quality does have a drastic effect on the efficiency of the systems, as Peter mentioned. We could get clogged valves, clogged HIUs, and it does increase wear on pumps and other moving parts within the system. And if it goes drastically wrong, then the pipework can deteriorate very quickly. Particularly a word of warning, anybody out there that's got any carbon pipework installed, it's a nice cheap lightweight option, easy to install, but you have to get the water treatment spot on with that, because within very short periods the welds can be attacked, and the bacteria can affect the pipework, and it can pinhole very, very quickly. So I can't highlight that one enough. Can we jump onto the next slide, Peter? Thank you. This is an example of, it's one of the Telford Homes projects, I believe, that Galleon's reached down in East London. We had a very good contractor on that one who did the install and was on top of the water treatment from day one. The couple of graphs there show the dissolved and total ions, with graphically shown with the maximum and minimum limits. Obviously, there's no minimum limit, but a maximum there. As you can see from the the dotted lines on the curves. They were tested at regular intervals. I think there was probably a few more points, because we were certainly testing at fortnightly intervals earlier on. And as you can see, where there was a bit of a spike there in sort of April time, it started elevating up through May and June. We spotted that before it got to critical out of limits, and were able to do remedial works to bring it back into line. And now it's chugging along, sitting there quite nicely. That particular project was connected to an E.ON ESCO supply with an external district heating network. ESCOs are particularly hot on water treatment. So although you'll have a plate heat exchanger and the downstream side of which is within your control, you may have elements of primary pipe work where you connect into valves, etc., from the ESCO before it's got the hydraulic separation. And the ESCOs will be all over you, making sure that you've got the correct flushing procedures and water treatment in place, cleaning their section of the pipe before it's all opened up to their system, because obviously they don't want to risk contaminating a whole wider network, which could cause damage to multiple properties. So the graphs there that show the trends. We would look for graphs not just for iron, but for inhibitor levels, pH, the whole gambit. And then it's a bit of a water treatment guide for dummies. People like pretty pictures, so if you've got people on site who aren't water treatment specialists, but they can see a graph is going out from between the red lines, it can be a red flag, and they can elevate that to the maintenance department, and so people could understand what's actually going on. So it's, as I say, the water treatment is the lifeblood of the system. Without it, if it falls out of limits, it can cause multiple problems. And although it's not the cheapest exercise to undertake, it is an essential one. If you get it wrong, it will cause a lot more hassle and expense. Okay. Thank you, Peter.
So FairHeat are engaged with a number of operational sites. We provide continuous support to ensure that water quality is maintained and ensure that routine network monitoring is carried out in line with BSRIA and British standards. So water samples are taken across site on a routine basis, which may vary from site to site depending on the network size or its previous water quality history. So if there are maybe previously known issues, then a site may require more additional testing until this is resolved. So we typically carry out quarterly visits, which include on-site chemical analysis, which will monitor things like pH, alkalinity, inhibitor levels, as well as recording the status of water treatment equipment, such as whether it's online or offline. But these visits will also include an annual microbiology sample, which is sent off to the lab. And these are only really required annually, as provided that there is no previous bacterial growth detected. Then due to the fact that it's a closed system, it's relatively a minimal risk that it will suddenly appear. But from results obtained at the site, we then carry out trend analysis to see how the system may have changed from previous visits, and then provide a summary report with recommendations. But what we essentially do is provide a bridge between the water specialist and the client, and then this includes from raising like more simple issues such as isolated equipment to providing more in-depth analysis and consulting with the water specialist to resolve any issues going forward. And we found that this process is good for maintaining continuous contractor engagement and providing a log of the water quality and how it's being maintained. Next slide, please. So monitoring multiple parameters will often highlight cause and effect. So for example, on one site, and we were monitoring consistent acceptable levels of pH and alkalinity. But when we actually came to reviewing the water treatment equipment, it was found that the EMWA had been isolated. So we were able to flag this back to the maintenance contractor and ensure that this was reinstated. Another sort of issue that will flag on site is like high levels of water hardness. It's typically associated with systems that have higher levels of makeup water being added to the system. So our recommendation is typically to install a pre-treatment plant on the boosted cold water that's entering the system, such as a water softener. But sometimes systems do just require more makeup water than others, but significantly high levels could indicate a leak on the system. So we had another network that was flagging high levels of water hardness, and when we monitored this against other parameters, it was found that there was also falling levels of inhibitor. And when this was flagged with the maintenance contractor, and they had been redosing the system, this sort of pointed towards the potential for a leak. And we recommended that they installed a water meter on the makeup water, and this became part of our monitoring to flag how much was being added to the system. And then the final point on this is sort of, we found trend analysis really useful, especially for like issues where we've had previous corrosion problems, and an individual result has flagged that it's slightly outside of the limit, but we've monitored over a period of time that it's a negative trend. We've been able to confirm with our water specialist that there is no ongoing corrosion. So yeah, we've had really good engagement from that. And yeah, thanks.
You're on mute, Pete.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so a common theme throughout this has been trend analysis, which is what we obviously look for to highlight issues before they arise. However, I want to just highlight that as network temperatures are likely to reduce through ambient loops or heat networks just becoming more and more efficient as we look to make decarbonize the heat, we might get to a point where bacterial issues start to proliferate at a much quicker rate. And I just want to highlight that fortnightly testing during pre-commissioning, although might be good enough now, may not be good enough in the future. And the same with quarterly testing as for BG50 as well. And it may start to create this, make this proactive approach that we're trying to adopt a bit too slow and turn it into a reactive approach, which obviously we don't want to happen. Just, there we go. Just want to highlight the availability of continuous water quality monitoring, which was my graduate project. So during my graduate project, I effectively looked at the importance of every single performance indicator within the water quality sort of analysis area, and highlighted that the four that you can see on the slides were the sort of most important. There are a whole heap of benefits to sort of continuous monitoring of your system in the same way that sort of HIU continuous monitoring has been proven to be effective. So we can pick up sort of chemical related issues almost instantaneously, and it also moves water quality into a sort of data-based platform. So historical data can be stored away much easier. It removes that sort of requirement for a paper trail throughout pre-commissioning, which, you know, contractors are busy enough as it is. It may be a benefit from that perspective. And the reason I say chemical related issues is because we still may not be able to get that bacterial analysis sorted through the complexity of the biological metabolic pathways that nitrate reducing bacteria and sulfate reducing bacteria tend to adopt. Further drawbacks are you're still going to have to increase your capex, and there will be variability in your maintenance requirement, and that's dependent on the monitoring equipment that you will use. However, in my project, I did see significant benefits from a cost perspective. And yeah, definitely something that I think should be thought about a bit harder in the industry. Yeah, just one final point. So as we can't monitor bacteria in the same way that we maybe can all of these chemical parameters, some level of sampling may be required, and a hybrid approach may be actually beneficial for your system. So thank you. That's it from me, and we welcome any questions.
Great. I'll just take control of that. Thanks for that. So question from Wes Haley. Are you adopting the CPC option in the new BG 29/2020 as it is shown to extend pipework life?
Yes, we have worked on systems with the CPC approach. We don't dictate that. That's from the water treatment specialists' perspective. We leave that to them. We have been in discussions with...
Actually, Pete, do you just want to say what CPC is, just so people are aware?
Yeah, CPC is a closed system flush. So what you're doing is you're filling your system from the word go with water that's dosed with chemical inhibitor, and then whilst you're flushing, you're adding temporary filters onto various locations of your system, and then ramping the pumps up to run all of that water through these filters, gradually reduce the filtration size to a point where you should clean your system and remove all of the debris from it. So yeah, as I was saying, that is a sort of methodology that is dictated by the water treatment specialist. We've been on systems and been involved in systems that both use flush to drain, which we're totally happy to do as long as the methodology is there. And we're also very happy to adopt systems and work on systems that do have this CPC approach. But yeah.
Another one. Do you think deoxygenated and VDI 2035 compliant systems have a part to play in future heat networks?
Yes, I've seen a lot of traction recently on this sort of the VDI process. It's been acknowledged in CP1 2020 and also in BG 29/2020. For those who don't know what VDI requirements are, it's a German standard that adopts a deoxygenated system requirement, as well as reducing your mineral content within your water, so chlorides and sulfates and all other ions within your water, down to a point where the ideal scenario is your water effectively becomes inert. And the sort of positive side of that is by making your water inert, it can't react with your metal and reduces corrosion rate significantly. In terms of whether I see it coming to the industry at the moment, I am hesitant to sort of recommend it. And that's mainly because of the risk of catastrophic leaks during the pre-commissioning process. And if that does occur, then your deoxygenation plant may struggle to deoxygenate all of that air that is coming into your system. And yeah, I'm just struggling on that point at the moment. I think there definitely is scope to maybe make a primary circuit with all of your expensive equipment deoxygenated, and then using a plate heat exchanger, potentially have a dosed system on the other side of that. But yeah, need to do a bit more thought on how we go about recommending that.
John, do you have anything to add on that? Or?
No, I think Peter's covered it there. It's certainly as the as networks change in the future, if we're going for ambient loops, then the risk is going to increase more than it is now. And yeah, it's going to be a developing developing industry. Certainly, zero oxygen systems that can be incorporated, but there's all the expense associated with that as well.
Okay, I've got another question here. We're running out of time. From the graphs on Ellie's slide, it looks like you adopt a more stringent limits than BG29 or BG50 guidance. Why do you feel the need to improve upon industry guidance, and how are those revised limits agreed?
So from that graph, we didn't really feel that the BG50 limits uphold system water quality. So I think their limit is for total iron, it's 15 milligrams per litre, and from previous experience and conversations with water specialists, we kind of determined that if you've got 14 milligrams per litre in a system, it's probably going to be in pretty poor condition. So we agree these revised limits with contractors and clients, and then we set these so that they can be maintained. So we actually have a limit of 1 milligram per litre, and then it means that as if this is recorded, we can see like an upwards trend. This is generally flagged pretty much way before it gets anywhere near that criteria that's set out in BG50.
Great. I think we're actually out of time on that, I'm afraid. It is worth noting, I think this comes back to Pete's point earlier, there are some disconnect between CP1 2020 and BG29 as well, with CP1 2020 generally having more stringent limits than BG29. Okay, thanks a lot for that. Thanks, John. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Ellie.
Yeah,